So I have made the stitches so far. I've worked on them manually, and it was kind of a pain to really work on all of them like this. Now there is a faster way, and in this chapter I am including a chapter that I did for free a while ago. It was actually on this model, but basically what it dealt with is making an alpha map to create or model the stitches that you see here on this belt and on the pants and on the shirts. Now, I am including this because what I will do is after you guys watch this chapter, and it was actually meant as kind of an extension of my modeling part 1 video set, what it deals with is creating an alpha map to be able to do these stitches. But at the same time, after that chapter is done, after you guys are done watching it, what I want you to, basically what the chapter after will go over is the creation of a texture map, which will complement that alpha, and you'll be able to model and paint these stitches much quicker than I was able to do in the last video. So with that said, let's move on to the video. In this video, what the focus will be for me to create a stitch texture or stitch alpha that we're going to be using in order to create a lot of these stitches around these belts and some parts of the clothing. And what it will be is pretty much the same thing that I've done with the sides of these pants or these seams that I have here. I used a pre-existing brush that did a lot of the stitching for me, and I don't mean it did a lot of the stitching for me. I mean, all I had to do was basically just go over this area, and the map applied in a very specific manner, and that's pretty much what I'm looking for in terms of getting the stitches done on this belt. Now, to start, what I really want to do is I'm just going to give you an example of what kind of brush I'm looking for. Well, if we go over to the brush menu, we go over to and we look for a stitch. Here we go. And I'm just going to turn off my symmetry and I just start using this. You're going to get a brush that works like this. And this is pretty much what I'm looking to create on my own. Now, if we go over again, over the brush menu, and we go over to the stitch brush, you notice that base type is standard, so I can pretty much just create it off the standard brush. And the reason I'm going to do that is just to show you guys exactly what kind of properties you need in order to create that. And really, there isn't a lot. I mean, the main thing that you have to do is you just have to go over to stroke. You have to make sure that you are in lazy mouse, your relative, I guess, and you have to make sure that you have a roll. So, we have a roll. Let's use this, and well, right now we're getting nothing, or not what we're expecting. Well, you know what? One of the problems right now is that we don't have an alpha, so we can't really see the effect that we're having with this brush. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just use the arrow, and I'm going to see what I'm getting. Well, this is actually not too bad. This is pretty much what I'm looking for. Well, let's see if we could make this a little bit better. Lazy step, lazy radius. And what I'm really looking for is in the lazy radius, if I go high enough, you're going to notice that that red line gets a little bit longer. And this makes it a lot easier for me to get smoother lines overall. Okay, awesome. Now the problem is that I don't want to use arrows for my stitching. I want to actually make a stitching alpha. Well, in order to do that, I'm just going to go over into Photoshop. So with Photoshop open, I'm going to make a new image. And this image will be, I can make it 512 by 512, but I'm going to make it 124 by 124 pixels, 16-bit depth. That's perfect. Although we might have to lower it down to 8-bit because usually ZBrush doesn't really like importing 16-bit images, but just so that I have a high-quality source, I'm going to leave it as 16-bit for now, at least within Photoshop. Alrighty, so we have this image now. First step for me to do is to just go into the paint bucket. I make sure that I have what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into this HSB and I'm going to make that into 50%. And this will give me a gray that is 50%. And what this will allow me to do is it will allow me to paint colors onto this map where white pushes up and black pushes down. And 50% gray stays exactly where it is. Alright, so if I go ahead and just make a new layer, I'm going to go ahead and just create, I'm going to press and hold on here. I'm going to create a gradient. And then here, we're going to create a new gradient where I'm going to start off with black. I'm going to end with 0, 0, and 50. So that's where I want to end. And now we can play around with all this stuff in here. Well, I guess what I could do for now, just to make things easier, is I could do something like this, and I could click here, so that at least I know that I have 50% gray here. I could affect this one and just bring it up slightly. And I'm gonna move it in like that. And this tutorial that I'm making right now is really no different than what Ryan Kingsley has done. It's just, again, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have more completion towards my tutorial here. Alright, so we have something like this. Well, if I just go ahead now and just pick or select a portion of this, and actually I might not even have to do that, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and select a portion of this canvas, like this. I'm going to select the gradient, and when I click, I'm going to click, and then I'm going to press Shift out like that, and I get a map like this. Now, it's hard to tell in which direction I'm going. Like if I do this again, you notice that there's a line and I can tell exactly in which direction the gradient is going in, but I wasn't able to tell that. Well, one of the main issues with that is that I have a 50% gray background already, and that kind of conflicts with the line color, and it's kind of hard to tell exactly in which direction you're going. But if you know how to use the tools, it should not be a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and just do the same thing here. Left click, press and hold Shift, and then let go here. And now we have something like this. Next step that I could do is I could just go to the background. I could fill it in with black with my paint bucket. Okay, so we have something like this, and we are very far along now because we have the main bump from that's going to be caused by the stitching. And then the next thing we need to do is just work on the actual stitches. So the way I'm going to do that is, well, there's a few ways. One of which includes me drawing things like the ellipse tool and rectangle tools, or I could just go ahead and just make a selection, add it, and do all that. Well, the one thing I like about the rectangles, or even rounded rectangle tool, is the fact that this lets me accomplish a few things all in one. Now, I don't really use this tool all that often, to be honest. But let's see what we get if I go ahead and do something like that. And all I'm doing is, if you might not be noticing it here just yet, but if you zoom in a few times on this image, you get an extra handle right beside the vertices. And of course I can pull on these handles to give me more curvature on my little shape here. And of course I can do the same thing here. And I will be doing the same thing here. So I'm going to pull this down, and I really should make sure that I am pulling just about the same amount of, just about the same distance. Maybe I might need to pull a little bit more here. I'm going to pull this back. And I'm always making sure that this line here is straight. And it might be hard to be able to tell initially, but that's why we're going to be refining these shapes for. Okay. So we have a shape like this, and for the most part this will work. I mean, I really don't have to be overly accurate because there's no way that this is going to be applied as accurately within ZBrush anyways. All I need is the basic shape. Now, when I started drawing this rectangle shape, you might have noticed that the layer that was created as a result came with a color and the actual shape drawing here. Well, if I double click on this here, on the color, I will be able to modify that to be perfectly white. Perfect. Well, next part is, let's see if this works. If we just double click on that layer, or if we go ahead and right click and blending options, layer properties. I usually just double click on a layer. Okay, so blending options. Now what we can do here is just go ahead and use the inner glow. And instead of having an inner glow, what we're going to do is we're going to set this to black. We're going to change the blend mode to normal, because what we want to do is we want to create a gradient within this shape. So instead of having an inner glow, we're going to turn that to normal from a screen additive blend mode, and then we're going to fill it in with a gradient black. So I'm just going to make sure that's opacity to full, size like that, and something like that will work just fine. Okay, so we have our shape more or less. The next thing I guess I could do is I could make sure that, because right now this stitch just kind of sticks out all at once. It's still very straight. What I need to make sure is that if you look at it from a profile, I want this stitch to kind of look like that. And right now it's kind of like this. You'll see in a minute. But basically what I want to do is I want to go ahead and go inside here. Actually, you know what? What I might want to try is if I just double click on this again, and I go over to the gradient overlay, I might be able to select a gradient or create a gradient where both sides are black, or basically the center is white. Both sides are black, and then I'm just going to go ahead and you can see the result here. What I'm aiming for is sometimes this is really a bit of a pain to select. But yeah, I'm aiming for this thing to be purely white and just kind of fade off towards the edges like that. Okay, now this is pretty much what I want. It's almost exactly there. The only thing I need to do is I just need to stretch this so that each stitch is slightly longer, because I only want 2 stitches on this texture map. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and just select the shape. I'm going to go into this arrow here. I'm going to select that and stretch it out. And when I'm stretching, I am given pretty much freeform movement in here, but if I just move up and down and just hold shift, you might notice that it's going to constrain into that axis. Now I'm going to move this layer, and now of course when I'm moving, I'm once again holding shift like that. And of course I'm going to go ahead and just go and right click on this layer, duplicate it, and move it up like this. And the one thing I could pay attention is the distance from here to here, and make sure that it's about the same on here. Now when you're selecting layers, you really don't need to go through here. I could just simply hold Control and select this, and that will work just as well. Of course I have to be in this to really be able to see where it is that I'm going. Now another thing that you guys could do is you could always just use the arrows on your keyboard. So about that distance will work, and I think that will work overall actually. Okay, so we have our stitches, we have the gradient map here kind of going outwards, and the only thing I might want to do is I might just want to refine all this. So make a selection, get a little closer to these stitches here, because remember there's already a little bit of a gradient black within my gradient that I'm using when I'm painting on this thing. Just going to go ahead and make sure I get back my texture map that I was using. And I might want to make sure that that is slightly more. It just bumps out a little bit more. I left click, and hold, and go to the left. I do the same thing here. Go back to my paint bucket or gradient tool. Left click, hold as I drag to the side and press and hold shift. Let go, and I get something like that. Okay, and this will pretty much do as far as what I need to do with my stitch map. So I'm just gonna save this out to, if I could just go to D and I go to my texture folder. I gotta wait for my hard drive to spin up. And then I'm gonna go into fabrics, and I'm going to go ahead and create a PSD file and make a stitch 2 or stitches 2. I already have one, so I might as well make a second version. And for now, I'm just going to save this with layers, and that's okay. So if I go ahead and just go into my ZBrush back into ZBrush, and I load in my alpha, I'm going to go to import, and in here I need to go back into my alpha directory, stitches 2, and let's see what we get. Well, we get something like this. And is it what we want? Well, the depth wasn't what it expected, so it's not exactly applying correctly in here. If I go ahead and just try to apply that to this object, let's see that the result that we're going to get. Not what I want. Okay, so let's go back into Photoshop and convert this to an 8-bit channel map. And I'm going to go ahead and for now, I'm going to flatten the image just in case and save it as stitches 2. Okay, so let's try to re-import that, stitches 2. And now you see that the thumbnail is showing perfectly. And we get something like this. This is not too far from what we want because the texture actually imported perfectly. The only thing we have to do now is we have to go into, and I'm going to go ahead and just close all these menus, and I didn't need to close the alpha menu, but I picked the alpha menu. And in here, you notice the texture has applied properly. All the stroke options that I mentioned are applied properly. What I have to do next is I have to make sure that the mid value is 50%. Now, if you guys ever have any problems reaching that 50, just as long as you're sliding in here and then just let go and type in 50 on the keyboard, press enter, you'll notice that now we have a perfect stitch map. Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and just select this belt, and I'm going to go to solo mode. To go ahead and close this. I'm going to go to geometry, and I'm going to make sure that I add a little bit more geometry to this belt. Reason being is that if I go ahead and just start stitching, yeah, not so hot, huh? So divide this model a little bit, and this much geometry will do just fine. I could divide this model more, but considering this belt will never be bigger than this, I really don't need any more geometry. Okay, so brush becomes a little bit bigger. And what I could do technically is I could just go ahead and use symmetry mode on this. But first I'm going to test and see what I get. And for the most part, I think it's actually fine. Now, the reason why I wanted to make this test initially is because what happens here is this model is not exactly perfectly symmetrical around the center. So what I might want to do is might want to just go ahead and use symmetry all the way around up until about this point, and then I might want to go and manually add the detail. So I'm going to start from about here. I'm going to want to make sure that these stitches are just big enough, and they are. And the reason why I want them to be this big is because I want them to be noticed from far away. And of course, when you're going to end a stroke, you want to make sure that you begin it at around here, just a little bit into the actual stroke. And of course, don't continue if you get too far off a curve. And yeah, that's about fine. I don't need to be too accurate with this stuff. I mean, considering from here I can't even tell that. Small mistake. I could tweak this for forever, but what am I gonna get for it in the end? I want to make sure that this tutorial kind of gets the idea across. Now here you might notice that I'm having a bit of a hard time getting a smooth curve. And the way to fix this is if I just go to stroke, I increase the lazy radius. And the other thing I could of course do is if you just look at my cursor as I'm traveling, if I make sure that that cursor is always staying on the edge there as I'm traveling right across the shape, then I'm going to make sure that this stitch is more or less right at the edge, exactly where I need it to be. Oops. Now this kind of stuff can get sometimes tricky, especially with size and whatnot. And it really is a good idea to just take your time. Don't rush too much. Just go across like that. And we're not that far from being done this section here. All right, awesome. So those stitches are done up to that point. Now what I need to do is I just need to, maybe I might use symmetry for a little bit in there. And of course, if you're not getting what you want, just just undo and just retry. Okay, so I've gotten this far, and the next part I'm just going to go ahead and just turn off symmetry. So press X to turn it off, and just do this manually. Okay, and of course do the same thing here. I'm going to go press X temporarily to get me a little closer to the center. And as you might have noticed when I was moving in here, the shape, like basically this area here and this area here are not symmetrical. This one sticks out a little bit further out this way, out that way than this area. So you might have noticed that this stitch started kind of fading out as I was still able to draw this one here. And of course, to correct that, I just have to get out of symmetry and go ahead and just continue drawing the stitches. Like that. All right, awesome. I'm gonna get out of solo mode here, and that belt is looking a lot better than it did previously. I'm going to hold Alt and select this part of the belt, go back into solo mode. I'm going to once again make sure that I have enough geometry, so divide that tool. Nope, still a little bit more. Okay, that's much better. And just go over this section of the model here. And just try to make it somewhat clean. Now it's not perfect, but you can always either clean that up, but you also have to notice that I am going to be looking at this model from about this distance at the very closest, so I don't really need to worry about that. There is some dirt that you can actually get away with. Alrighty. So our belts are finished. The next part for me to work on will be this shirt. Now there's two alphas that I'm going to need for this section here, but I'm going to take a slight pause and continue in a sec. Whoa, that was a long break. All right. No, I just had to pause and create a new clip. You know, if I made any mistakes, I'd want to make sure that I have something recorded properly. Anyways, so the next part, that I'm going to be working on is something to replace what I have here on the sweater. I don't really like what I have here. This was just kind of a temporary, you know, thing here, but just kind of like a placeholder, I guess. But that's all it was ever going to be. So if you press N on your keyboard, right beside B, what you get is a menu like this. Now I haven't really gone into this menu much, but what it is it lets you select your objects in alphabetical order and very quickly, instead of always having the subtools and, you know, you scrolling through. So if you have a manageable amount of objects in your scene, you can just very easily press N, and, you know, here you go. Well, what I want to select is the shirt. So go ahead and select the shirt. And one thing that you could do at this point in time is just go ahead and go to the subtool menu here, rename shirt, select the pants, or not a pant, but rename pants, rename belt. Buckle, I don't even know what these things are called. So belt and gums, teeth, and you know what, they are the lower teeth, so lower teeth. Eyes and mouse texturing, yeah, that's fine. All right, so go ahead and just pick the shirt. Now, of course, when we press N, everything is named, so it's very easy to access. Well, the first thing I want to do here is I want to make sure that my level is, well, first of all, I seem to have absolutely no levels in here. So I'm going to go ahead and just lower my subdivision level, and I'm going to smooth all this stuff over, because all I want is I just want some sort of hint that, you know, of my lines here. But for the most part, I don't really need any of this here, because what I will be doing is I will be cutting into this surface anyways. So I'm going to be smoothing all this over. I don't need to make sure that it's overly accurate, just accurate enough. I just want some sort of guide along here, just enough so that when I'm cutting into the surface, I know exactly what I'm doing. Now this I'm gonna do a little bit later, or I might just do one side and just, you know, work on the shirt and leave that be. Okay, so I'm just going to smooth that over like that. Just a lower portion. Of course, here I'm also going to smooth all this stuff over. I really don't need those details in there. And get rid of that as well. Now what I'm hoping that I'm going to get here when okay, so basically what I'm hoping that I'm going to get is when I go up in subdivision levels, I still have some of those lines, and I do. But for the most part, the bumps are, you know, the majority of the bumps are out of there. Now I can still technically smooth this over a little bit more, and I probably want that done, but I just kind of want some kind of placeholder or kind of like a hint of exactly what I'm going to be placing over that section. So any kind of bump that I have is good, just as long as it's somewhat minimal. Unless, of course, you guys want to keep that, you know, that'll be fine too. I mean, it all depends on, you know, what it is that you guys want. Well, the next part will be for me to make something that I can add into here. So back into Photoshop. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and just go into my browser and type in pixologic.com. If I bring over my browser here and I go into the support download center. In my alpha library, you will notice that there is a texture that I want to use, and that is under the textile, or it should be under the textile. What I want to download specifically is this thing right here. Now I've already gotten this texture onto my computer, but this is the one I'm going to use. Now what I will be doing is I will be editing this to suit my needs. So if I go ahead and just open that up, this thing here, what I've done really is I've just gone ahead and used the polygonal lasso tool. I've done something like this where I've isolated a part of it, you know, wherever the outside texture was located. And then what I've done after that is just painted in this section entirely black, this section entirely black, and so on. So basically what you want is you want to come up with something like this, or at least I did, for my purposes. And once again, I saved it out exactly the same way as I did this texture here. So I know that I'm skipping over here a little bit, but considering I've shown the steps of what I did over here, and I just made the explanation a second ago, I'm hoping that you guys know what it is that I'm actually about to do. So import, I'm going to import that alpha map here, and let's see what we get so far. Okay, so we get something like this. Well, that's fine, except for one thing. I don't want to use it like this. What I want to do is I don't want to, you know, go ahead and just draw it down like that. What I want to do is I just want to place it in a rectangle, or using a rectangular stroke. So I'm going to go ahead and just change the stroke from dots to drag rectangle, and I get something like this. Now you might have noticed that lazy mouse was still on. I don't need it to be, so I'm just going to go into stroke, turn off lazy mouse, and now I get something like that, and that's perfect. So go ahead and just apply it like that. Now this shirt is already close to 2 million polygons, so I really don't want to subdivide this thing because my total points for the scene is 15 so far, 15 million polygons, and that really is enough for this object here. And the reason why I don't want to go too high in this tutorial is because generally what happens is when you're working on really big scenes with a lot of polygons, you might need to troubleshoot some things, and that's going to really slow, you know, just basically it's going to slow me down considerably, and, you know, I don't want that to affect this particular tutorial. This tutorial isn't about scene management, so my focus, considering it is kind of on the alpha generation and creating this, you know, alpha map here, I want to make sure that the focus remains on that. So just continue placing these until, of course, you reach all the way around the model. Something like that, I guess. Maybe I might want to place this one slightly closer so that this one just kind of works. And you know what? That's good enough. Now, of course, when we look at this, this looks a lot prettier than what we had previously. And I guess the last thing I might want, I guess what I could do is I could just go ahead and just draw the stitches here, and then I'm going to worry about this in no sec. So alpha, go back and choose the stitches too. This, change to dots, go back into stroke, turn on lazy mouse, and we once again have the stitches, you know, alpha, or rather stitches brush. Now these stitches I might not want to be as big as they were previously. So just going to zoom in a little bit closer like I did. And something like that will work pretty much fine. Now I guess I'm going to also check that to make sure that, see, my mid value was not 50%, so I'm going to make that 50%. And of course, this will apply a lot better. And I guess that might have been one of the mistakes that I did a second ago as well, where I probably didn't... Actually, no, for my last texture map that I was using, this one here, I really didn't want for my alpha to be 50%, not for that one in particular. Now, I guess what I could have done is I could have made sure that I paid attention to this a little bit closer, but in all honesty, this is good enough for that purpose, for the sake of this tutorial. In the end, I'm going to refine this a little bit more, but again, for the sake of this tutorial, it's good enough. And now I'm just going to apply some stitches right across here, like that, and I'm hoping that it's done to both sides, and it is. Awesome. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to make sure that I have sort of like an indentation in there. So my brush that I'm going to choose is... I'm just going to go ahead and just get rid of the alpha that I had. This stroke, I'm going to go ahead and just turn off these options. And all I want to focus on is just smoothing this over, because I really don't want what I had previously. I mean, I don't think it's going to affect it too much. But what I will be doing in a second is I will be using the pinch brush. And with the pinch brush, what I will be focusing on is just carving a sort of like a hole in there. So let's go ahead and just press the B button on our keyboards, and then P to refine our search. Choose the pinch, and right now our pinch works like this. Not what I want, but what if we were to up the Z intensity? Let's see what it's actually doing. It's doing something like that. Yeah, not too sexy. Okay, so brush smaller. Still not what we want. Let's go ahead and just go over to the brush menu here, and I'm going to open it up, close the alpha menu, go into the brush menu here, and into modifiers, and I'm going to drag this brush modifier into the negatives, negative 100, and we get something like that. Well, that's a lot better. If I make my cursor smaller, I'm going to get something like that. Now, the reason why it's acting up here is because, again, this model is not symmetrical, so when I try to use symmetry, it's just not working. That's fine. For alpha, I might want to experiment with one of these alphas here. And as you notice, I am getting a much finer pinch crease kind of, behavior for my brush. So if I just go back into my alpha and I choose something like that here, it's getting even finer, especially in here. What it's actually doing is, I like the way it's kind of falling off into the crease. So I'm just going to stick with that, and I'm going to go ahead and go into my stroke here, choose lazy mouse, because I do kind of want to have a very clean cut. Like that. And now I gotta do the back section. And of course, when we have something like this, these kind of, when we come up with a tool like this, you guys really should save it. Make sure you save these kind of brushes, because they do, they will save you a lot of time in the future. And of course, the other nice thing about these is that they can be used to refine all the other edges that you might have made previously. So I'm just going So I'm going to go over parts of the model that I had drawn earlier to make sure that all my stuff is just nice and clean. Like that. And you might want to even go over portions like that, and I don't know, whatever other areas that you seem that you think would be important to go over. Now, granted, all this stuff over here, I didn't really go over just this section here, but you get the idea. What I've done is I've gone over my stitching, I've made sure it's cleaner, and it just looks a lot better than it looked in my model on the video set. And of course, I could apply the same thing to these pants. Maybe I might want to apply some, or I might want to create another stitch map that will go over a lot of these stitches here, just a little bit more. Maybe I might want to subdivide these pants a little bit further, and of course refine this, and maybe right around the bottom of the pants, and whatever you seem to think that would be important on your characters. Anyways, that's it for this tutorial. What I really wanted to do is just create a few texture maps and this pinch brush that I could use for cutting very, very fine lines, and maybe and also just create this alpha here to create for this, to use for this sweater here or for this shirt. And that's pretty much it. So on the what I'm going to be basically doing is on the texturing video set, I will be taking these stitch maps and using them a little bit further along with some colors or texture maps to make sure that what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to make sure that when I paint these stitches, every single one of these stitches will actually have some color associated with them, so that when I have a leather texture on this belt, when I of course drag over the stitches, I'm going to get automatic color for the actual stitches. But that's going to be I'm going to save that for the actual texturing tutorial. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for this chapter. Cheers.